Hello, everyone. My name is Hee-Jung Jun. I'm a professor in the Department of Public Administration, Sungkyunkwan University. First of all, I'd like to thank the RSAI inviting me to this prestigious conference. I'm so honored to stand here to talk about urban housing development in Korea from a comparative perspective as a keynote speaker. Yeah, I'd like to start my talk by discussing the concept of housing first. I placed three different types of housing here. First one, those housing units were built after Korean War for the refugees. And then you can see that those units were built on mountains because the refugees needed shelters after Korean War. So you can see that housing is like a basic need for humans. And however, housing is not merely a physical structure. So housing is also important for like a national economy and for the individual's standard of living. Korean government has used the housing industries for both to revive and stabilize national economy. And for individuals, housing assets accounts a large portion of housing wealth. So the second photo, the typical type of housing units in Korea, which is called apartment regardless tenure. So as of 2023, the apartment price, the median apartment price in Seoul is 0.6 million euros, so very expensive. So not many people can afford the housing prices in Seoul. And the third one, I took this photo. So that's the house I bought in the United States as a first-time home buyer. So the kids is my first kids, and then she's like happy running around the yard. And then I chose this neighborhood because of safety, and also the neighborhood was in the very nice school district. So you can see that housing is also related to various urban issues like school quality and safety. Housing is also durable good. So those two pictures, I took also those two pictures. And this area one time was designated to redevelopment site. So full demolition was scheduled. So some of the owners decided, gave up maintaining the houses. And then because of the economic downturn, the construction companies gave up redeveloping this site. So you can see that the poor maintenance, so caused blight nearby houses, and then in this neighborhood, like a poor maintenance, so many houses also resulted in neighborhood decline. So I want to talk about housing is not like merely physical structure, and it has a multi-dimensional nature. So housing should not be only about physical structure, and it requires a comprehensive approach, including like a neighborhood change. So for the first 20 minutes, I'm going to talk about Korea's major housing issues and programs to deal with housing quantity, cost, and quality issues, which are not mutually exclusive. Then I'm going to point out the problems of overlooking neighborhood change in Korea's urban housing development, and I'm going to conclude this presentation by asking the future of Korea's urban housing development. So current housing market in Korea. So I want to first to explain about the geography of Korea. So Korea current population is 51 million, and it has been declining since 2019 with a low birth rate and aging population. And then in the map, the yellow part is the Seoul metropolitan area, which includes the capital city of Seoul and surrounding provinces, Incheon and Gyeonggi. And then population in the Seoul metropolitan area is about 26 million. So over 50% of Korea's population actually living in that small area. So if you ever get a chance to go to Seoul, and then you will see a lot of high-rise buildings as shown in the photo. So it's very different from like a Budapest, right? And I want to talk about two main phenomena in Korea's in Korea's housing market. The first one is spatial disparity, so unbalanced development across the country. So there has been a continuing population movement to the Seoul metropolitan area. So it caused the higher housing demand and costs in the area. And at the same time, other regions have been struggling from declining population and economy. And also there has been increasing vacant houses and deteriorated neighborhoods in the non-Seoul metropolitan area. So the government has made a lot of efforts to deal with this issue. So one thing is the attention to relocate the capital to another area, but it was not successful. But rather the country developed a new administrative capital city, which is called Hee-Jung. And also another effort is like building innovation cities. So in the map, there are 10 like innovation cities were newly developed beyond the Seoul metropolitan area for deal with for the unbalanced development. However, they are not so successful. Still, many people moving to the Seoul metropolitan area. Second is the change in the types of housing and household. So apartment, I mentioned that this is a high-rise residential building, regardless of tenure, unlike the United States, is mostly rental housing. So it's the major housing type in Korea. And then over 60% of total housing units are apartment. And then because of the increasing housing demand in the Seoul metropolitan area, so new housing development has been occurred in the surrounding provinces in Gyeonggi and Incheon. But at the same time, old neighborhoods have been declining along with the new construction. And another thing I want to point out is the growth of one-person household. So it's not shown here. Oh, one-person household currently accounts for about 40% of total households. So decline and a decline of the despite the decline of population, because of the reduced household size, the number of households have been actually increasing. And the problem of the one-person household is they are more likely to experience housing poverty. So let me talk about Korea's major housing issues and programs. So first of all, I'd like to talk about housing programs in deal with the housing quantity issue. So urbanization in Korea. So after the Korean War in the 1950s, so there was a rapid urbanization, and then it was largely Seoul-centered. So about 500,000 people moved to Seoul within 1 to 2 year period in the 1960s. So in the graph, Korea the urbanization in Korea shape in an S shape, like other countries, but you can see that 1960s and 70s, the slope was very steep. So at that time, there was a rapid urbanization. So because of the rapid urbanization, slums created. So many slums are developed in Seoul. So you can see that those shanties and squatters developed in Seoul. And the squatters also still remaining in the central part of Seoul, so I can still see this kind of substandard housing in nearby manufacturing areas in the central part of Seoul. And then with the rapid urbanization, there was a serious housing shortage in Korea. So it also caused the serious housing affordability issue. So in this, on the top of the right side, the newspaper article says that people, a family, suicide because of skyrocketing housing prices in the early 1980s. And also you can see that the orange line in the graph, that's a housing supply ratio. So it significantly declined during rapid urbanization. But you see that it increased again after 1980s, 90s, and 2000, and it reached 100%. It was actually thanks to large-scale housing development in Seoul and nearby area. So a series of housing provision plan was adopted between 1970s and 80s for large-scale housing project in outlying area in Seoul. So on the bottom, the left side, they are formerly agricultural farmland, and then they were converted to large-scale apartment complex like the next side. And also, the 2 million housing unit construction plan was adopted in 1988, around like the Seoul Olympic time. And then first, at that time, the 5 new towns were constructed in Gyeonggi province. So in the map, I believe, the purple color shows the first phase new towns that were constructed in Korea, in the Seoul metropolitan area. However, those new towns got criticized for not being self-sufficient new town. The government intended to develop like a garden city type of new towns, but actually jobs not available in the new towns, so it caused a serious traffic congestion problem. And then in the 2000, there was the development of 12 second phase new towns, and the second phase new town is shown in green color. And then in the late 2010, because of the continuing population growth in the Seoul metropolitan area, the government announced developing third phase new towns shown in orange and red colors. So this shows the first phase, one of the first phase new town, Bundang new town. So formerly agricultural farmland, and they are converted to large-scale apartment complexes to accommodate housing shortage problem. And second phase new town, Pangyo new town, because of the criticism for the first phase new town not being self-sufficient, this new town included more office areas, business district, so that the new town can be more self-sufficient, having both job and housing. Then I'm going to talk about the housing issues in terms of housing cost. So housing affordability. The rent-to-income ratio and the price-to-income ratio are the most commonly used measure for housing affordability. So right side, it shows the orange color and dark orange color indicate the household who have housing cost burden. And then, I'm not sure if you can see, the top level, in Seoul, there are more households who experience housing cost burden. And then in the table, the bottom, price-to-income ratio is very high in Seoul. It is almost 8. When price-to-income ratio, when it is 4, it is considered affordable. However, in Korea, in Seoul, it is 8. And then one-person household also, single-person households also have more housing affordability issue, as I mentioned before. So what to do with this housing affordability issue? So Korean government employed price and rent control for housing affordability. So one program is price control on new apartment. So it requires builders to sell new apartment at a regulated price determined by the government. So actually it benefits a lot for the first-time home buyers. And then the rent control policy, it is more recently introduced in Korea. So it is to keep rent increase below 5% of the amount written in the leasing contract. And also, the heavier taxes are charged on multiple home owners. So those who own more than one house, and then they are charged heavier sales and real estate taxes. So this is to stem speculative buying of houses. Then how about public housing? So public housing is like a representative supply side program as in many countries. So public housing is constructed and owned publicly and rented at affordable prices. So Korean government launched its first systemic public housing in 1989, right after Seoul Olympic. And then, so compared to United States, we have like a shorter history about public housing. And then in 2021, as of 2021, the long-term public housing, which can be rented over 30 years, comprise about 6% to the housing stock. But Korean government has tried to provide more public housing. And then programs have been diversified over time. So at first, most public housing were newly constructed at as a large-scale apartment complex. And then today, the government purchases housing from a private market and rents at affordable prices to low-income class. And also there are long-term and short-term public housing programs, and then there are also public housing based on income level and household types. In Korea, birth rate is pretty low, so to increase fertility rate, the government have a special type of public housing for newly married couples. And also, social exclusion has been problematic, as in the United States. So public housing, to deal with the social exclusion problems, there has been some attention to mix public housing with private housing in large-scale apartment complexes. Okay, so housing benefit programs, like in UK and the United States have a similar type of programs. This is like a representative demand-side program for low-income people, and then it launched in 2015, so it's less than 10 years. And so housing subsidies are given directly to the low-income people. And also, it is for both renters and homeowners in Korea. So right side, you can see the photos. And then the owner of this house got subsidies from the government, from this program, and then redid their roof and then the exterior of this house. Okay, then I'm going to move on to talk about housing quality issue. In this slide, there are two scenes shown in very famous Korean movie, Parasite. So in the Parasite, if you watch the movie, there are two families, one rich family and then the other one is a poor family. So the poor families were living in like a substandard housing. This is called like a semi-basement housing. So you may remember there was like a heavy rain in the movie, and then this house got totally flooded. But the rich family's house didn't get any negative impact. So in addition to this kind of semi-basement housing, there are also various types of substandard housing. On the top of this slide, it is called 쪽방, which is a divided room, very small size, averaging 3.3 square meters. And then residents living in this kind of substandard housing suffer from lack of facilities and services, and the second one is like a greenhouse, as you know, and it is called vinyl housing in Korea, and it is a constructed layer of thin wooden board with a vinyl covering on the top, and the low-income people live there. And then 고시원 is on the bottom of this slide, and it is a very tiny room with usually no window, but in this photo there is a window, but space only for like a bed and a desk. So I mentioned that single person households are increasing, and then they have housing poverty issues seriously, and then many of them living in this kind of house. And to deal with the housing quality issues, a lot of housing, like substandard housing is existing in Korea. So to deal with this problem, the Korean government introduced the minimum housing standard. So minimum housing standard was introduced to include requirements for safety, sanitation, and living conditions. So in the table right side, so for the two-person households, it needs one bedroom and then dining room and kitchen, and the minimum housing size is 26 square meter. So there is some standard, and then. So thanks to this kind of requirements, the share of people living in substandard housing have has been declining. So on the top of the slide, in 2006, it was almost 15%, but over time it declined by 5%. But still, this is a considerably large portion of households. So there have been various programs to deal with the substandard housing issues, and then Seoul, the city of Seoul, the largest city in Korea, has the divided room remodeling project. So it provided a laundry room and like a bathroom, and provided community facilities. And then central government had like the programs for distressed neighborhood, and then so they did the alleys shown there, and then provide community facilities and then various community programs for the residents. Okay, then I'd like to talk about the change in Korea's housing policy. So Korean government has concentrated their effort on housing supply because of a serious housing shortage at first. Then they have moved to focus on the improving housing conditions. So it is like after Korea reaches the housing supply ratio of 100%. And at the same time, Korean government also introduced the housing right. So housing right refers to the right to live in adequate housing. So Korea has moved from housing provision to housing welfare, and then it was undertaken the Framework Act on residency in 2015. So it is to guarantee housing right and provide residence accessibility for low-income people. So the act also requires comprehensive housing plans for higher level government in Korea. Housing plan actually existed before, but with this new act, the higher level governments need to develop a housing plan that discuss about how to provide public housing and then how to utilize the minimum housing standard. But when I look at the requirements for the comprehensive housing plan, I noticed that neighborhood dynamics are not neighborhood or neighborhood change, and nothing is addressed. Okay, then I want to point out the problems of overlooking neighborhood change in Korea's urban housing development. So neighborhood is a spatial unit where we our daily lives occurs. So I send my kids to neighborhood school, and then I go to grocery store in my neighborhood. So housing consumption is collective consuming both neighborhood characteristics and housing stock. So when you maybe when you try to buy a house, you probably consider neighborhood characteristics as well, right? So housing development requires a comprehensive approach, including neighborhood change. However, neighborhood dynamics have not been seriously considered in Korea's urban housing development. Then why was neighborhood change overlooked? So as I mentioned, rapid urbanization and then focusing on economic development, the government and then some of the richer property owners favored full demolition and redevelopment over preservation of existing neighborhood and existing housing stock. So in this slide on the bottom, I live in the neighborhood, and then I live in a high-rise apartment complex, but before this redevelopment, actually that area was the above area. So low-rise detached housing units, and then they were completely demolished and then redeveloped to large-scale apartment complex. And also the top-down planning was one of the problems. During urban renewal era in the United States, public participation is not so considered. And then in Korea, until recent years, actually the public participation is not much considered. So top-down planning, because of that, local communities and neighborhoods have limited influence on their own neighborhoods. Okay, then I want to connect the urban housing development in Korea, then neighborhood change studies that I undertook. So in this slide, you can see a hypothetical neighborhood. So central city and then inner suburbs and outer suburb. And then here, happy smile face, the yellow happy smile face indicate economically healthy neighborhood. And the black bumps are economically declining neighborhoods, so they are not happy. So my research has centered around on the question, why do some neighborhoods stay economically healthy and others do not? So in my study, I defined neighborhood change as change of individual and place opportunities for actors, including households, property owners, and business owners in a neighborhood. And also, many studies have different measures for neighborhood change, like population change, and then change in poverty rate. But in my study, I more focused on a housing value change at the neighborhood level. So this shows classic theories of neighborhood change, and according to filtering model, it is important to have a new housing for neighborhood economic health, and then according to the border model, empirically many studies find that percentage minority is negatively related to neighborhood economic health. So based on those classic theories, many studies undertaken. And then when I started my research on neighborhood change, I found that most studies focused on neighborhood level characteristics, like housing characteristics and demographic characteristics and socioeconomic characteristics. And also I found that some studies pay attention to metropolitan level factors. So metropolitan economic conditions also influence neighborhood economic health. So in Korea's case, in the second largest city, Busan, marine industry significantly declined and many people lost their jobs. And then that also influenced the neighborhood change. Then in my study, I wanted to contribute to the literature by including city-level factors. So in this study, I hypothesized that neighborhood change is produced by interactions of factors at all scales, including metropolitan, city, and neighborhood level. So in this study, I theorized neighborhood economic health is influenced by high performance of local government. And then I also theorized that greater citizen participation and cooperative behavior is related to the performance of local government. Then I also theorized greater citizen participation and cooperative behaviors is observed in more smaller cities and more homogeneous cities. So in the United States, so extreme, a large-scale suburbanization has been problematic. So it caused a lot of small cities and then more homogeneous cities, and it has been problematic. So my study does not support that kind of development. Rather, I was talking about the reality. Okay, so I used the US Census data. And in my study, the census tract, which is a small spatial unit taking US census, is considered a neighborhood unit. Then I examined the neighborhood economic change between 1990 and 2000 in the United States. So my dependent variable is change of neighborhood housing value. So it can improve or decline, and it can stay stable. And this table shows the empirical result at the city level. So I found that neighborhood level and then metropolitan level, those variables are very similar to the result in the prior studies. So percentage black people was negatively related to neighborhood economic growth. And then at the metropolitan level, economic condition was also related to neighborhood economic growth. So in this study, I found that city size, which is measured in population size, city size was negatively related to neighborhood economic growth. And then racial ethnic homogeneity and family type homogeneity were negatively related to neighborhood economic growth. No, positively related to neighborhood economic growth. So my study found that neighborhood change is produced by interactions of factors at like a metropolitan, municipal, and neighborhood scales, as I hypothesized. And then, based on this finding, I suggested that considering both larger contexts, including city-level characteristics and metropolitan characteristics, and factors at the neighborhood level, is very important in setting public policy for community development. And then secondly, I found that neighborhoods improve economically in smaller cities and more homogeneous cities. So again, I'm not supporting the extreme suburbanization in the United States. I'm talking about the reality. So based on this finding, I suggest that it is very important learning from smaller cities and more homogeneous cities that support greater citizen participation and cooperative behaviors. All right, then I'm going to talk about another study which focused on the effect of racial ethnic composition and then cross-level interaction between neighborhood level minority composition and metropolitan level economic condition and minority composition. So in this study, I asked two questions, and then I want to mention about the photo. I took the photo in Chicago's Millennium Park. And then you see that the black kids, white kids are playing together in the park. But however, the racial conflict is a serious problem, and I thought that it is a very important factor for neighborhood change. And then there have been a lot of studies regarding that. But in this study, I asked two questions. If the effect of neighborhood ethnic racial composition on neighborhood change is conditioned by metropolitan level factors. And then secondly, I ask if the effect of neighborhood racial ethnic composition on neighborhood change altered over time. All right, so why focusing on metropolitan level factors? Many studies find that there has been spatial intersection between where most black people live and where manufacturing plant closing occurred. So based on this situation, I thought that the negative effect of minority composition at the neighborhood level is aggravated if it is located in deindustrializing metropolitan area. Secondly, I thought that according to the contact hypothesis, being more familiar with the minority people, the majority group may be more tolerant toward the minority composition in neighborhood. So based on this hypothesis, I thought that the negative effect of a minority composition on neighborhood economic growth is moderate if the neighborhoods are located in metropolitan areas with a large number of minority people, because the majority group is more tolerant toward the minority people. So this situation calls for a cross-level interaction between neighborhood minority composition and metropolitan economic conditions and minority composition. And secondly, why might the effect have changed over time for the neighborhood minority composition? So in the United States, there was the ban on institutional racial discrimination, and then also there has been capital inflows in minority neighborhood. Previously, capital flows are not allowed, but over time it changed. And also, minority people, their socio-economic status improved, so it was it also led to the reduced racial prejudice over like a minority people, and also gentrification. So many countries experience gentrification, but gentrification mostly occurred in poor minority neighborhoods in the United States. So this kind of situation allow me to propose hypothesis. So again, I showed this model again. So neighborhood level characteristics are related to neighborhood change, and the metropolitan level characteristics are also related to neighborhood change. And then in this study, I focused on the cross-level interaction between metropolitan level characteristics and neighborhood level characteristics. So I proposed the hypothesis. The negative effect of neighborhood minority composition is aggravated by deindustrialization and moderated by minority composition at the metropolitan level. My second question is the negative effect of neighborhood minority composition has declined over time. So for the first question, my answer is yes. And this table shows that percentage black at the neighborhood level is all negative. So we all know that. There are a lot of empirical studies finding this one. And then I show the cross-level interaction variables. So percentage black with the decline of manufacturing job, which indicate deindustrialization. That's also negative, except for the 1990s. So that means it is aggravated. The negative effect is aggravated in deindustrializing metropolitan area. But when you look at the interaction term between percentage black and percentage Hispanic with the metropolitan level minority composition, they are positive in the 1990s and 2000. So it means the negative effect is moderated by my metropolitan level minority composition. So this finding suggests that the negative effect of neighborhood minority composition is differentiated by metropolitan level factors. Okay, the second question. Has the effect of neighborhood racial composition altered over time? Yes, it has. So I compared the coefficient values, and the negative coefficient value actually declined over time, the magnitude declined. And also I showed that negative effect of neighborhood minority composition has been moderated by metropolitan level minority composition in more recent decade. So I concluded that the negative effect of neighborhood minority composition has declined over time. Okay, so based on these findings, I thought that not every neighborhood is equally situated. So although some neighborhood has like a large share of minority people, not all decline. So it is conditioned by metropolitan level factors. So it is important to considering metropolitan level factors in community development efforts. And also, the negative effect of minority composition has declined. So it is thanks to the institutional banning the racial discrimination and then various support to include socio-economic status for minority people. So there should be continuing effort to that kind of things. Okay, so my third study, in this study also about neighborhood change, but this time I focused on spatial dependence. So in this slide, I took this photo again. And in this slide, this is actually when I lived in Michigan, and I bought a house, and then it's one of my neighbor's house. And then they are I believe they are empty nesters, and they have a lot of time to clean their yard. And then you can see that the yard is very clean. So in autumn, Michigan is like this. A lot of leaves falling down from trees. Actually, my house, my yard was like that. But I was so influenced by my neighbor who cleaned the yard very well. So my husband and I talked, we need to clean. So I was influenced by my neighbor because they very closely lived nearby my place. So I was wondering if it happens, this kind of influence also happen in neighborhood change. So why spatial dependence in neighborhood change? So when you purchase a house, when you try to buy a house, you consider your neighborhood as well as nearby neighborhood, right? So you think that how it will affect my housing price, right? And then also so housing values and then include reflect that kind of intentions, right? So I thought neighborhood change has a feedback effect, so influence each other. So in this study, I proposed the hypothesis: neighborhood change is related to change of nearby neighborhoods. So I conducted spatial analysis of both global and local patterns of neighborhood change. So in this slide, I show neighborhood housing value, the current status, not change at this time. And it shows the Detroit metropolitan area in Michigan. Here, the red clusters, so they are high clusters, which indicates affluent neighborhoods that are surrounded by other affluent neighborhoods. And then the low neighborhoods, the blue clusters, indicates less affluent neighborhoods that are surrounded by other less affluent neighborhoods. And then actually the blue clusters located in the city of Detroit and the red clusters are located in the suburbs. And then this trend continued in 2000 and 2010. So this kind of spatial disparity prevalent in this metropolitan area. Actually, many metropolitan areas is the same situation. And then I move on to see the spatial pattern in neighborhood housing value change. So when you look at this map and graph, spatial autocorrelation is lower, but still, it's statistically significant and then still considerable spatial dependence in neighborhood housing value change. So, but when you look at this map, it's different, right? Red clusters are inside of Detroit, in the city, and then some blue clusters are outside the city. So that indicates that growing neighborhoods, surrounded by other growing neighborhoods and forms that kind of a red clusters in the city of Detroit. And then the blue cluster indicates declining neighborhoods that are surrounded by other declining neighborhoods, and then they form clusters outside the city of Detroit. So this kind of neighborhood housing value change is not randomly distributed. They make clusters. So there are spatial dependence. So this remained in the 2000 and 2010, although the spatial gap between suburb and cities is prevalent, but actually that gap has been declining. So policy implication. So based on this study, I found that neighborhoods are not isolated entities. And they are interconnected with nearby neighborhoods, as I hypothesized. And then also neighborhood decline can be contagious because they influence each other. So based on these findings, I suggest that coordinating community development efforts is very important. And then when when neighbors coordinate each other, they can have better outcomes for more successful community development. Okay, maybe I can have time for that. Maybe I'll skip. Okay, then what's the future of Korea's urban housing development? So I want to make a linkages between housing development in Korea and the neighborhood change study I conducted. So in Korea, the paradigm has shifted in urban policy. So I mentioned that typical housing development in Seoul is like a wholesale redevelopment, like a fully demolishing everything and then build new apartment complexes. However, there are a lot of criticism on that. Low-income people got displaced. So, and then social capital declined so much. So because of those criticisms, a special law enacted in 2013, and it was to promote urban revitalization by focusing preservation and maintenance. But the problem is the regeneration is not well linked with the urban housing development. So housing is not focused in urban regeneration. Often it focuses on like a physical development. And also, both urban regeneration and urban housing development do not consider neighborhood dynamics much. So I think that although there was a paradigm shift toward urban revitalization, still they do not consider like a neighborhood change. So my suggestion is taking neighborhood dynamics into account in housing development. So I have emphasized that housing and neighborhood are not independent from each other, right? And so I suggest that there should be more consideration of the significance of neighborhoods and their evolution. Now, particularly, like racial ethnic diversity is increasing in Korea, but now there is not much consideration of how this kind of increasing racial ethnic diversity will affect neighborhood change. And also, city and metropolitan influence should be more considered on neighborhood change. So this is a regional science conference. So many of you are interested in like a regional development, right? I think that the neighborhood change, like altogether, can also cause like a city change, and a city change also can together cause like a metropolitan and regional change. So I think both like a large scale factors and then like a lower level scale factors should be considered for both neighborhood change and regional development. And then finally, I'd like to suggest that spatial dependence and spillover effect should be considered in neighborhood change. So in Korea, especially in Seoul, housing market is very tight. So one development can affect nearby areas. And also it was frequently happened, new housing development to accommodate housing shortage in the Seoul metropolitan area has negatively affected the old neighborhood. However, there was not like a serious consideration about this kind of spillover effect. So before finishing my presentation, I wanted to announce the press conference, which will be held in Daegu, in Korea in August. So I'm the chair of the international committee of at the Korea Regional Science Association. And then the Korea Regional Science Association has decided to extend abstract deadline only for the attendees of this conference. So you still have time to submit abstract. So I look forward to seeing you in Korea in August. So thank you for listening to my presentation.
Dear Hee-Jung, thank you very much. And we have asked a discussant, and now I'm looking for Isabel Nilsson from the University of North Carolina. Sorry. Obviously, I was not looking at the stage. Sorry. So the floor is yours. Please take the microphone, and your discussant's role is now on. Please.
Okay. Well, very good. Hello, and thank you for a very interesting talk. I had prepared some slides, but I also have them on my phone, so I will share them with you later. First, go Michigan. You gotta say that. And second, so there's a lot of similarities, right, between the US. So when I read your presentation, which I received a few days ago, one of the things that really caught me was some of the similarities, right, that we have in terms of rapid growth, rapid urbanization, and issues with housing affordability, right, and supply. But there are two ways in which the country is kind of dealt with this, right? In Korea, it appears to be more, like you were pointing out in your talk, you have more of a top-down kind of planning and response, right, where there actually was, right, a response to this housing shortage that occurred. And local communities and neighborhoods had very limited input or influence on this. Now, let's go to the US context, right, where some of your studies are being made. There you have more of a bottom-up policy when it comes to land use regulations and change, which, right, has a lot of impact on housing and particularly on housing supply. So that's why I really appreciated that you took into account the city level, because, right, when it comes to land use policy and how much can be built and what can be built and where, that happens, right, at the city level. They have control over this. And local residents have often a lot of venues to influence this, mostly opposing new construction. Because local opponents, right, and this is one of Glacier's constant in his papers on this, on housing affordability and economic growth, right, is that local opponents, local homeowners have very little to gain from increased supply of housing. Because what it often entails, right, is a decrease in value to one of their often biggest assets, right? Or they at least fear that more housing, right, more supply, and we're all somewhat economists in here, right? More supply, what happens to prices? They go down, right? So if you are a homeowner, it's in your interest to kind of limit supply and oppose new construction. And some municipalities have been more aggressive on this than others, particularly in high productive places. If we take San Diego, San Francisco, New York, right, where a lot of people want to move, but also where house prices have gone up a lot. And when we look at, but in your talk you also talked about some racial disparities. Oh, there are my slides. Well, yeah, well, okay. Okay. And I have them there too. Oh, great. Okay, so, right. When it comes to homeowners, right, those who are more likely to oppose new construction. Just look at the graph. I put this together very quickly, but most of them are white, right? So there's definitely racial disparities in home ownership, and then potentially in who has a say. And so I love the Housing Voice podcast from UCLA. If you are interested in housing, I highly recommend it. But some researchers from there, what they did was they looked at what common opposition is against new housing supply. And that's concerned about the built environment, who nears live use, so the classic NIMBYism, right? And concerns about the development process. We're going to skip that. And they found in just LA, and I bet you if you look into other cities similar to LA that experiences a lot of demand in housing, there is about 20 formal avenues to oppose new housing, and they use it. So example of other regulatory barriers, and these are just a few. I recently gave a class on this to my regional economic development class, and I had multiple slides, but I took them out for you. But one of the most common ones, right, is exclusionary or low-density zoning. So that means you have kind of a minimum, right? You only can have one house per parcel, minimum lot size, and other things. So that leads to a lot of low-density development, and therefore, right, less supply of housing. You also have complex regulatory processes in place. Okay. Lots of papers. But essentially, right, so housing regulations lead places to issue fewer housing permits. And when we have less housing permits, that leads to greater house price growth. I put in here a paper by Glacier and Geico. Probably did not pronounce that right. On the economic implications of housing supply. And one thing that they show in high regulatory places, right, if you see at the bottom one, oh, laser, great. No, doesn't work. Okay, so the bottom graph there, right, that's San Francisco, a place with high regulations on housing. The cost of building is not that much different when you start taking into account a lot of different things. But you can see how the annual permits are very, very low, and prices are very, very high. Atlanta has also been growing like crazy. But there, right, you have a lot more permits issued, and prices have been able to be kept low because they have less regulations around housing. Okay, where do I want to get with this? Let's keep going. Another context, right, that we have in the United States that you also talked about in your papers, right, is unfortunately a very long history of racial discrimination in the housing market. One include, right, HOLCs, redlining. So what this meant was that the Homeowners Loan Corporation took maps and with red ink put down where mortgage lenders may be facing greater risk. These were areas with a high concentration of black residents. So what happened followed that, right, is essentially signaling, do not invest here. This led, right, and this went on between 1930s, 1970s. And what happened, right, was that these neighborhoods received less investments. And this has implications even today in terms of how these neighborhoods fare. And there's been lots of recent papers in Journal of Urban Economics, Urban Economics and Regional Science and Urban Economics that have looked at these long-term implications for these neighborhoods from this. So, why are you talking about all of this? Given these differences, right, in US and in the Korean context with respect to policy, history, and demographic characteristics. So my questions to you, and what I hope we could discuss, right, is how may, right, similar studies play out in the Korean context, and what do we need to consider when making policy suggestions from one context to another? I'm hoping what I talked about here gives a little bit of a cautionary tale to the Korean context, right, in terms of neighborhood or local influence, right, where you had top-down, we have bottom-up, and maybe there's something in between that is better, right? So what can policymakers in Korea do as they consider neighborhood dynamics and possibly neighborhood and residential influence in housing policy based on this? Okay.
So Isabella, thank you for your comments. So your main question was like, what can Korean government do with this situation, right? So in Korea, top-down planning approach has been problematic. Like one policy applied to many different areas, but that didn't work well, right? So bottom-up approach, like in the United States, it's necessary, right? So in Korea, local autonomies have been enhanced over time, but I think it's not. We still need more like a local autonomy, so that local governments pay better attention to their neighborhoods. But current situation, the urban regeneration project, like a lot of funds are coming from the central government, so they don't know the local characteristics well. So that is why the importance of existing neighborhood and neighborhood dynamics are not considered well. And also citizen participation. There has been some efforts, a lot of efforts to increase citizens' participation. I believe but still not enough. So maybe we need to localize the kind of urban regeneration project so that we can consider more local characteristics, and then we need to require more citizens' participation so that they can voice their own needs to the government. I think that's very important and then I think that we can have very good lessons from the United States. United States also experienced that urban renewal era and then demolish everything what it did. But over time, community development has been important, and the citizens' efforts very important. And they had some housing plans to revitalize distressed neighborhood. Then I think we need to go that similar way. But although we have our own situations, but I think that's a very good way we can adopt for our future of urban housing development in Korea. Thank you. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you. That was very illuminating. Since the title of your presentation has comparative in there, my question would be, from our own perspective in Italy, social housing typically comes from central planning within the municipality, and the municipality creates or tended to create macro blocks that are assigned to people in principle economic need. But there is no limitation time-wise for this economic need to be assessed. And so you have families, typically first-generation immigrants, but also second-generation immigrants who spend their lives in social housing. And these macro blocks are literally their life. They spend their whole time in these places. So we don't have a formal redlining because, racially speaking, the country was very homogeneous until the 1970s when it became, it turned from a net immigration country into a net immigration country. But since then, silently, this redlining is taking place. And moreover, we have also a very local problem, which is organized crime, which typically put their hands on these places, which basically have a black market, so that unofficially these housing units are moved across people outside the main mechanisms that assign these housing units to the people in need. So the two questions would be, one, if there is a way to make these social housing units temporary, because they should be for people who are in need, so that in the meantime, as we get them out of poverty, we can, release them into the regular market. And secondly, if there is a way, or in your experience, if there's policies that allow to prevent the formation of these clusters of people who are surrounded literally in the neighborhood sense by other people who live the same lives. So all of them are unemployed, all of them are first generation immigrants, because then the probability that these people will integrate in the society are very thin. Thank you.
All right, I think maybe I can connect your question to the developing more mixed income communities. I mean, in the United States, the major problem of public housing is concentrating poverty. So people living in large-scale public housing couldn't escape from poverty. So to deal with that problem, housing vouchers program was introduced. It did not completely solve that the concentrating poverty problem. But in Korea actually did similar, make similar efforts. So I mentioned that in Korea there are mixed income, large-scale housing development. So public housing, we had a similar situation. So poverty was concentrated in the large-scale public housing. So we, to deal with that problem, so in the large scale, when there is a new large scale apartment complex, it requires to include some of the public housing inside of the apartment complex, so that the low-income people can have a lower model and that they can interact with ordinary people. And then in addition to that, housing benefit program was also introduced. So housing benefit program, the advantage of it is that they can live where they want. So they don't need to live in where poverty is concentrated, but they can live wherever they want. But then they get direct subsidies from government. So they can be one way. And then recent years, the Korean government pay more attention to housing, maybe housing service, so that it is a connect the low-income people living in public housing, search for jobs, and then they can be self-sufficient after several years living in public housing. So maybe other countries can have that kind of approach so that social exclusion can be lowered, and then they can be more self-sufficient in some years after living in public housing.
Professor Yun, very insightful presentation. So actually, Hong Kong and Seoul shared a lot of similarities in terms of the housing issues, including that we also got that subdivided flats, with around 10 square meters for each unit. And in the last year, the Hong Kong government also has a new policy to have the minimum size for the new constructions, has been below 20 square meters. Because before that, there was a very many nano flats, like we call this nano flats in Hong Kong. It's below like 20 square meters, but it has a 1-bedroom flat. So, but now we also have this kind of affordability issue. So this leads to my 2 questions for you. The first question is that as we know that in South Korea there's some monopoly powers, some big companies dominating their economic growth. And I saw there's a lot of land development are actually controlled by those big firms. They have the gated communities, and they also provide like free shuttle services from working place to residence, and even to some major shopping and other public amenities in Seoul. So my question is that what is the role of those monopoly powers in contributing to the housing stratification in Seoul? So my next question is that, as you mentioned, that there's some house rental cost of in Seoul is pretty high, and I heard that in Seoul that in addition to those renters need to pay rental, but they also need to pay a large amount of deposit money. So it's compared to Hong Kong that we only need to pay 1 month or 2 months deposit, but in Seoul that sometimes it will be equivalent to like 1 year or 2 years rental, if my information is not wrong. So I'm wondering if when you consider those housing affordability issue, if you have you considered the capital cost of the deposit, in terms, especially for those young, fresh graduates to finding those housing places and finding their new jobs. So these are my 2 questions. Thank you very much.
All right. I first talk about the second question. So you mentioned about the different type of rental housing, which is called 전세. Actually, that's very unique in Korea. So put a lot of deposit. And then originally people didn't pay rentally month. They just put deposit. Then owners put that deposit into bank account, and then they made interest, because interest like a long time ago was like 10% and 7%. Today it has increased again though. So 전세 was a tool for residential stability in Korea for a long time, but over time the interest rate declined, and then many homeowners converted the 전세 to monthly rent. So it caused the housing affordability issues, and then many of the housing units converted to monthly rent. But still, deposit is very high in Korea. So regarding that issues, I think the government has programs to rent money to the low-income household at a lower interest rate. I think that helps the low-income people who need a large deposit. And then another one is also public housing. So for a long time, public housing was only for very low-income people. But today, fertility rate is very low and the population is declining. So the government has tried to increase birth rate by providing more public housing to the households who are not very low-income level. So those who graduated from college and then those who recently married, they can live in that kind of public housing. I think that is a way to enhance residential stability today. And then to the first question, the role of a big firm in the housing market, right? So Korea adopted the housing program that the big firms can provide a large-scale rental housing. Previously, no such program. So individuals just rent house from individuals, not from big companies. But now big companies can build a large-scale rental housing unit. And then it got, at first, when it was introduced, it was very expensive. It was not for low-income people. It was for more than maybe like middle-income people. So it got criticism, although the companies got subsidies from the government. So now the government changed the program. So some of the portion of the housing unit should be given to the very low-income people. So in that way, I think big firms jumped into the housing, like a rental housing market, but now they are more regulated compared to before. So that is a way to support housing stability in Korea. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay.
So I have like 3 to 4 questions. So the first question is, considering the rapid urbanization and population density in Korea, how do urban planners balance the need for affordable houses with sustainable development practices, and how does this compare with urban housing strategies in similar dense regions globally? And my second question is, given the cultural significance of the home ownership in Korea, how do cultural norms and societal expectations influence housing preference, investment patterns, and the community dynamics? And how do these factors differ from those in this other cultural context?
Cultural, about the cultural context in housing market. Okay. So home ownership is very, very important in Korea. So the households dream is owning a house as in the United States. Right? So many people try to buy a house, and then especially in Seoul, housing price increases significantly. So people who couldn't buy a house, they thought that they are lagged behind. So they are desperate, and so that is why those family members suicide a long time ago. But fortunately, there are a lot of programs applied to support housing stability. So that kind of committing suicide is not happening frequently today, fortunately. But owning a house is kind of a big dream for many family members in Korea. So as I mentioned, the median housing price is 0.6 million euro. So it is very expensive. So I was so fortunate. I was benefited from the new housing price control policies, because I could purchase new housing and regulate the price. Although I purchased the housing in the United States, but I was the first home buyer in Korea. So fortunately, I bought a house, and then but some other people who couldn't purchase housing during last hot market, and then they felt like they are lagged behind. Okay. Hopefully, I answered the question.
Is this working?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. One of the challenges that most metropolitan areas are facing right now is the huge vacancy rate in offices. And the city of Chicago, where I live, has a 30% vacancy rate. And the city has just provided $200 million to developers for 3 buildings to convert them from offices into housing, with the provision that 30% of those housing units are to be for low-income people. And the analysis is premised on the basis that this is a much more cost-effective way for a community to address housing issues, particularly for the low-income part of the population. And I'm just wondering whether you are facing similar problems in Korea and whether any consideration is being given to this sort of strategy to address some of the problems that both Isabel and you mentioned about access to housing, particularly for low-income people. Thank you.
Yes, increasing vacant housing is also problematic in Korea, but it is more in the cities beyond the Seoul metropolitan area. So I mentioned that there is a significant spatial disparity between the Seoul metropolitan area and the regions in other regions in beyond the Seoul metropolitan area. And then young people to get a job and then to live a better life, they continued to move to Seoul metropolitan area. So so other regions beyond the Seoul metropolitan area experiencing aging population, and then there is no young people, and at the same time vacancy rate is increasing. So what Korean government did was developing new cities beyond the Seoul metropolitan area, but still it's problematic. When they built new cities, actually it caused the decline of old neighborhoods. They built mostly on the agricultural farmland. They built new housing and new, they moved the public organization from Seoul to other region. And then with that new development, old neighborhoods have been declining with a large vacancy rate. So it's a serious problem with the increasing vacancy rate. But I think there should be more efforts to promote balanced development between Seoul metropolitan area and other regions. So because of politics, 10 different innovation cities were built beyond the Seoul metropolitan area. So they moved to other areas. But I thought that because of the 10 different cities were developed, agglomeration economy is not formed. So there is no cities that can be comparable to the city of Seoul. So they are all small cities, and they have not been surviving much. So I thought that the government should have developed another big city rather than building new 10 small cities, and they are not so successful. And then as I majored in housing, so I thought housing and neighborhood environment is so important. But I think that currently they focus more on physical infrastructure, and then people just the father who has a job in the 10 innovation city, they just commute. So their family members live in the Seoul metropolitan area, and then they just do not bring their families in other regions. So they just commute, and then the vacancy rates keep increasing. So it is very important that the neighborhood environment is very nice for the family members, so that they can bring their family members to outside of the Seoul metropolitan area, but that has been, I think, neglected. So I think it is very important to increasing the livability beyond the regions, the Seoul metropolitan area.
I thought it was interesting how you pointed out the difference between a bottom-up and top-down approach when you were comparing Korea to the U.S. As someone that works across different types of countries, I mean, you see different governance systems. For example, in the U.S. you have federalism, and that's also true in Europe, in countries such as Germany and Switzerland, and also you have more centralized countries like Korea. You see in Europe, like the Baltic states, for example. And I was wondering what you thought, given the different governance structures, what, in terms of housing policy, what the role, like for example, in a centralized country, the local governments could play, and in a more federalist country where you have a more bottom-up approaches, what the national government role would be, and how you could integrate the different levels of government to perhaps garner a more coherent response to coherent policy response to the challenges of housing supply and housing affordability, and also the fact that in many regions across even the US and Korea, of course, many regions are shrinking. So you have the dual problem of housing affordability in the large metros in particular, and also declining housing demand and the total breakdown of housing markets sometimes in these declining regions.
Yes. The role of the central government in housing policy is really big in Korea. So there have been attempts to localize like housing programs. So now the higher level governments can have their own housing plans. But the problem is there is no like a housing expert in other regions. So when I meet like people living in other regions, always say that they need to provide housing for their local people. But the problem is there is no housing expert. So I think that the central governments maybe try to more localize their housing policy so that local governments can have their own housing program that reflect local housing characteristics. But at the same time, I think this is like a transitional time. So there is no housing expert in other regions. So maybe the central governments try to educate more housing experts for the local governments, and then so that local governments can utilize those housing experts for their own housing programs. I think that's what I think to your question. Okay.
Yeah, from the US. I don't know if I speak loud enough. I will come and join you. The only thing I can say there, again, I don't do research on this, but I read a lot of research on this. I study in California, right, where the housing shortage and housing affordability issue has been ginormous, right? The state of California has actually gone and done some recent changes where they are effectively kind of limiting local government's control, or at least trying to impose some state control on it. The last I heard, and I think it was a few years ago, but don't quote me on that, there's been no real, they haven't seen a real change in supply yet from those policy changes. So I guess time will tell if it really will do something of doing a more top-down versus bottom-up in that sense.
Questions or comments? I really thank you very much for this very, very exciting presentation. Thank you also for the discussion, for Ms. Nilsson for coming in with opinions and comments. And thank you for all the questions that were raised. And with an applause, we are now closing this session. Thank you. And certainly I'm back with the technical details of the rest of the day. So just allow me to mention for all those who have applied to go to the Palinka distillery visit, this program will start at 3:45, the bus is going to depart from the parking lot next to the building, just like yesterday. So there is a corridor out here when you exit from the auditorium, and you will have to go out to the courtyard where the bus is going to pick you up at 3:45. We will have the JRC and OECD session at 4 o'clock, and we still have other parallel sessions from 4. Now the coffee break, and we will return. Thank you.